Often, superhero content is not interpreted in an artistic frame of mind, but more so from a consumer standpoint. There's lots of reviews, rankings, and discussions about comic accuracy, but this channel hits topics from a creative angle. I'm looking at these films, shows, and games from a socio-political and/or expressionistic lens, which does upset some people, but makes my stuff unique. I make conclusions that are personal, that aren't immediately obvious, and that you won't find in many other places. A while ago, I made a video about the Batman 2022 with the simple goal of explaining some things I didn't like about the film, or at least its missed opportunities. Of course, I love this film, and it's easily my favorite interpretation of Batman on the big screen so far, but I've never seen it as perfect. In my own experience, the perfect piece of art or media just does not exist. One of the best examples of art to me is a game called Outer Wilds, a space exploration and puzzle game about accepting death, but I'd never say it is perfect. Everything can always be better, and that's why we keep making art. There's always a new threshold to meet. And sometimes making better art or the idea of quality isn't even really relevant. This is a concept I hope people genuinely understand. Art is a lot like science. It's collaborative and requires that you are able to look at your own work and the work of others critically and more deeply. Ultimately, this video is building off of the problems of the previous, which was too subjective and kind of wrong. It was flat, rushed, and lacked deeper analysis. Now, I knew this was a less researched format. It was a simple, unscripted video to get some thoughts out. But as I look back, I realize people on YouTube often expect fully developed ideas. And expressing your precursor thoughts can be a little embarrassing. To be clear, I think there is a place for unfiltered thoughts on YouTube. I mean, podcasts exist. But it's quite rare I get to make a video on the Batman, and I might as well make it count. I still somewhat agree with the 4 points I made in the video, but the way in which it was articulated almost changes its point into something I'm not comfortable saying I align myself with. After all, I gotta pass the I'm Right awards on YouTube. Furthermore, this isn't just a correction. It's not like I'm that upset about my arguments in the video or I need to defend myself against someone. It's just that the shortcomings of the last video gave me a lot of ideas about how to proceed with this type of criticism in the future. Not only will I break down my new thought process on quote-unquote realism and superhero interpretations, but I will also attempt to reevaluate the articulation and truth of my previous criticisms. This is all about communication. Why can one criticism be subjective nonsense and another is somewhat useful and actually insightful? Practicality does not equal realism. I'm sure many superhero fans have gotten really tired of seeing overly realistic versions of their favorite comic book characters. I think Marvel has obviously broken out of this, but for a long time there was this notion that you couldn't directly adapt the comics because they were just too ridiculous, too campy, or too colorful. I've often been a big advocate of reintroducing a certain level of fantasy back into the live-action Batman mythos, but a specific balance of that fantasy. Too campy and you get Batman and Robin. Too realistic and you get The Dark Knight Rises. Yet what I just said right there is fundamentally a horrible way of framing quote-unquote realism in these films. It's way too oversimplistic. When you actually try to break down how to effectively use realism with these fantastical characters, you start to notice how it's not actually a simple one-dimensional realism to fantasy graph. Realism as a word is a lot more like artificial intelligence. It can mean so many things that it's not even a useful term oftentimes. In truth, I'd like you to consider the argument that Batman and Robin isn't bad simply because it was overly fantastical. The Dark Knight Rises isn't bad because it's simply overly realistic. This is a quite complex problem to think about, and that's why I want to first start with what the general audience thinks of the word realism. Realism as a concept is far more important in film than any other medium, I think because audience equate realism with substance or value. A while ago, Alien Romulus, I wrote this script when Alien Romulus was coming out. Alien Romulus was a big topic for its use of practical effects like animatronics. Just like many big budget films before, this is yet again another marketing campaign that is intentionally lying out of omission. To be clear, this is not a negative take on Romulus as a movie. When I saw it, I thought it was alright, and none of my criticisms have anything to do with the special effects, but more so the writing. But my issue with this idea of realism is the discussion surrounding the film, which is manufactured by the company. Do you remember Top Gun Maverick? I mean, this was a huge discussion. Do you remember how much of the promotion of the film was about how all the jet scenes were entirely real and there was a focus on grounding it in reality? Yeah, well, actually, a majority of the jet scenes were either assisted with VFX or straight up entirely CGI. This YouTube series by the movie Rabbit Hole explains this phenomenon in a lot more detail. Right now, there is a massive problem with the public, which has been manipulated to believe that VFX and CGI is the worst part of modern films, despite the fact that VFX has been a part of the filmmaking process since the 1920s. Truth is, most of the VFX and CGI we see is so unbelievably good that you don't even really realize it's fake at all. You don't see it. Then when someone spots a few instances where it's noticeable, they act all smart and talk about how bad CGI is, like they know what they're talking about. It's confirmation bias. It just proves how good CGI has gotten. So good that they spend massive amounts of money on advertising, pushing the idea that all of the film is real, quote unquote real. I mean, they pay actors to not discuss the VFX and straight up lie in their interviews. They make contracts with VFX houses that allow the film not to credit them or any of their workers to keep up this lie. Then once everyone has already seen the film, they completely flip the script. They put up a VFX reel highlighting how good its effects were and get nominated for an Academy Award. The issue is not actually VFX and CGI. These are just artistic tools. They cannot be good or bad inherently. The issue is that these companies have weaponized an easy marketing trick against the public and against their own workers who don't get paid enough and can't even put films on their resume sometimes. This attitude is a reaction to companies like Disney who utilize CGI so much that it put a bad taste in people's mouths. It's not that CGI is inherently a problem in Disney films, it's that they don't know how to use it effectively and they overwork their artists so much that the end product is noticeably fake even to everyday people. While the Batman surely utilized some of these marketing tricks, it is not nearly as bad in terms of VFX and CGI. It seems to be creatively used with restraint, like the rain in the Batmobile chase scene or like many of the firearm shots. Even though they used a new technology called the Volume, a massive LED screen system allowing them to capture multiple locations on a soundstage without utilizing a green screen, I want everyone to realize that all of the footage projected on these screens is CGI. Like, these aren't just real images. The Volume isn't just a 360 photo, it actually takes the rotation and position input of the physical camera in real time to then move a digital camera within a game engine like Unreal Engine. It literally cannot work if it's just a regular screen. The entire city in these shots are created within Unreal Engine beforehand. Of course, they did use a variety of real plates, real cars, or stuff like that in the background, but this is CGI, this is VFX. These techniques are incredibly smart and save lots of time and money. They are inherently a problem. What I'm trying to set up here is that practicality does not equal realism. Movies are made in vastly different ways, and ultimately most of them use VFX in substantial ways, in good ways. This highlights how hazy and simplistic the term realism is. Contrary to marketing, realism is a result of different art styles, a way of capturing a world whether it be fictional or not. I mean, look at Blade Runner 2049 or the new Dune movies. They are straight up photorealistic, yet many of the locations are entirely fictional. The line between what is real and fake is fuzzier than general audiences understand, and placing inherent value on one side is a complete misunderstanding of the topic. New technology is a tool. It can be used to capture realism and concepts we can't simply do in real life. And this marks a massive difference between the realism of The Dark Knight and the Batman. As I've settled with the Batman for 3-ish years now, I've realized my biggest criticism of the Dark Knight trilogy has been shattered. It was really easy to blame the shortcomings of the Dark Knight on its overemphasis of realism, yet I think that's a far too vague criticism. In some ways, the Batman is actually a more believable world than Christopher Nolan's interpretation. The character motives, politics of Gotham, acting, stunts, and technology feel more immersive than the Dark Knight. The world of the Batman feels like something you could touch, something that could exist on its own. The Dark Knight is for sure realistic. It utilizes so many more recognizable locations from real life, but that is exactly why it feels almost superficial to me sometimes. The Dark Knight is going for a James Bond style, while the Batman is going for a neo-noir style. Both experiences are going for realism, but in an entirely different way. So again, we can't just take a graph with realism on one end and stylize on the other, then move the plot point across and say, oh, this is where the Batman is, this is where the Dark Knight is. Realism as a word here just starts to mean nothing. Ultimately, these things cannot be 100% accurately categorized. There is a certain limit to the effectiveness of written language. But it's important for the sake of criticism, because if I say I don't like The Dark Knight because it is too realistic, yet I really like the Batman at the same time, you kind of have no idea what the hell I'm talking about. Naturalism, verisimilitude, and abstraction. So I set out on a journey to actually categorize what I mean genuinely by realism that would actually separate these two films. It has become increasingly clear to me that there is a difference between a story being set in a world that mirrors reality versus a story set in a completely different world yet mirrors the laws of reality. The former appears to exist in our world yet may or may not be believable. Just because a film takes place in New York City, like let's say Megalopolis, doesn't mean that story is automatically believable. The culture, events, and the way people talk in Megalopolis, like many musicals, is not believable at all. It doesn't really follow the laws of reality and requires some suspension of disbelief. On the other hand, you have something like Taxi Driver, where the events are fictional, but it's a lot easier to believe something like that could happen in real life. Not only does Taxi Driver take place in real life places, but it's also based on events and people that exist in real life. Obviously, this is not the extreme example. A documentary or a biopic is going to be both set in the real world and contain real events. Then there's another example where the world doesn't mirror ours at all, but the story tries very hard to apply the laws of reality to a certain extent. This is often the case for highly fictional stories like Lord of the Rings, Blade Runner, and Dune. Of course, the laws of reality do not apply the same across each of these, but they do attempt to make the world believable despite not taking place on Earth. So in the Lord of the Rings, the geography is heavily inspired by Earth. The behaviors of the different factions and species are inspired by human history and warfare, and even the magic system attempts to follow some kind of internal logic. In Blade Runner, it makes many leaps in logic, such as the existence of artificial intelligence, but beyond these assumptions, it tries to make the world around it react as if it were real. Dune is likely the best example because despite there being many magic-esque assumptions, there are so many details about the environment and the culture that mirror the laws of reality. The factions act the way they do based on an internal code inspired by factions and religions on Earth. Arrakis may be thousands of light years away from Earth, and Dune may take place thousands of years in the future, but when you watch it, you do think, hey, maybe this could happen in the future. So what I've distinguished is two different variables in describing the style of a story's world building, which I will call naturalism, how close the world mirrors ours, and verisimilitude, how close the story follows the laws of reality. Now there is one other variable that's really important here. A good way to introduce this is to go back to what I said earlier about musicals and how they are not believable. Obviously, people don't sing and do incredibly precise dance numbers in real life situations. I mean, obviously. But that could actually be less of an example of believability and more an example of abstraction. But that depends on how you interpret musicals. Abstraction is a separate condition which does not actually influence the realism of the world or its events. It's actually entirely oriented around our experience as an audience. It's actually entirely oriented around our experience as an audience. This variable is a bit complicated because it's somewhat linked to quote-unquote art style, which is a whole discussion in of itself. This is most obvious in animated films, although often the animated medium trends towards unrealistic stuff. But you could imagine that, let's say, Taxi Driver got an animated film adaptation where the world is a lot more painterly and the characters have smooth, exaggerated features, yet the world building and events play out exactly the same. To me, I'd still say it's very similar in terms of naturalism and verisimilitude. You can think of it as a filter put over the world simply to contribute to how the audience is interpreting or feeling about the story. So in the case of a musical, it could be argued that the dance numbers and singings aren't genuinely happening in the story, but it's just how the story is being told to the audience. I mean, this can be supported by the fact that characters in plays and musicals commonly do not acknowledge how bizarre the music aspect is. They act as if nothing weird is happening at all. Now that's an extreme example. A less extreme example is color grading or camera lens settings. A movie shot on 70mm versus 35mm is going to capture the same exact things, but it's going to make those things look different to the audience. When a film is color graded, has high depth of field or heavy grain, you aren't meant to genuinely think the world looks like that. It's just a filter over the world itself for you, the audience. Even in an animated film, characters rarely ever acknowledge how cartoony their bodies are. For all we know, that's just how we are seeing them as opposed to how they actually look to themselves. I find this concept fascinating personally. Like, in terms of a musical, it allows you to interpret the art in a way deeper way. Our three key variables in interpreting the world-building style of media are naturalism, verisimilitude, and abstraction. I want to clarify that I don't think this chart measures quality necessarily, and it's pretty specific to the problem I'm trying to solve. A movie being less realistic does not make it a bad movie. So let's use this to compare The Dark Knight and The Batman and see if we finally get a different result. But we can also add some extreme examples for reference. Robots. Everyone loves the Robots movie, right? So the Robots has very low naturalism, a little bit of verisimilitude, and a lot of abstraction. So this movie is absolutely not set on Earth and is 3D animated, so it's quite abstract, but also not abstract to the extreme either. For verisimilitude, it's pretty low because it's a world of robots and it's kind of cartoony and bizarre on purpose, yet it does have some laws of reality. It does mirror reality in some way, else we wouldn't really understand the story at all. I mean, gravity exists. This world takes inspiration from trains, cars, they have streets, they have real life objects like dominoes, so it's not entirely, not mirroring reality. Oppenheimer, on the other hand, is on the other extreme. It has very, very high naturalism, a lot of verisimilitude, but a little bit of abstraction, not zero abstraction. This movie is absolutely set in our world and is based on a true story, yet the events are a little bit dramatized and exaggerated, so it's not 100% believable or accurate. The abstraction isn't totally zero because the movie does often use VFX and practical effects to make impressionistic imagery of how Oppenheimer sees physics, events, or an emotional response. Now, finally getting to The Dark Knight, it has very, very high naturalism, a medium amount of verisimilitude, and a very low amount of abstraction. The Dark Knight is pretty much entirely shot in real locations that exist in our world, yet I wouldn't say I'd give it the same naturalism as Oppenheimer, because The Dark Knight wants the audience to believe these places are not what they are in real life. It's not Chicago, it's Gotham City. It's not 330 in Wabash Avenue, Chicago, Illinois, it's the Wayne office building. It's not the Royal Sonesta Chicago, it's Bruce Wayne's penthouse. This kind of lack of logic more so applies to the verisimilitude. It's a big problem across the series, showing very prominent landmarks that we are just expected to believe is within Gotham City. Across all of these movies, the city seems to morph unrealistically and change completely as it is shot in Chicago, New York City, and Los Angeles. And maybe that's not an issue for many people, but it's definitely a key difference for this series. Furthermore, the gadgetry and technology of The Dark Knight definitely looks somewhat realistic, yet seems to be more oriented towards the fancy and fantastical gadgets of James Bond, which makes it less believable. The Batcycle hand grabber thing, I don't even know what you call it, and the AR vision technology is definitely a little wacky and not as practical, and that may be the point. Now, I will say that the politics of Gotham and the behavior of characters is definitely influenced by reality. It's meant to feel like the events are real. The news reports on crimes, the police and government have disagreements, and Bruce questions the validity of Batman in this world. So in that sense, I do think The Dark Knight has a significant level of believability, and that's why the movie is praised, I think. In terms of abstraction, the film offers the very minimum, possibly to mirror the naturalism, to make it seem as if someone was holding a camera and literally filming the events with the characters. The extreme of this could be found in found footage films. The color grading is minor, the editing is traditional, and the framing is basic, so that you are seeing the events as they are happening without much outward expression or manipulation of the audience's feelings. Now we go to the Batman, which is somewhat different. The naturalism for the Batman is more of a medium rather than super high. The verisimilitude, I would argue, is a lot higher, or at least a little bit higher than The Dark Knight, and it does have a significant amount of abstraction. The biggest difference here is that while a lot of the film is shot in real locations, it tries hard to avoid known landmarks and attempts to convince you that Gotham City is a genuinely different place than other American cities. They go as far as to create fictional buildings in the skyline, like the Gotham Empire building and square below it. Even many locations are constructed sets. It sets itself apart from other cities by having a big seawall, unlike anything in real life. So in this sense, the naturalism is lower because Gotham City is not actually a real place and often doesn't mirror real places. Obviously, this is not entirely consistent, as I will discuss later. I mean, there are many locations that are pretty clearly landmarks. Another huge difference is the verisimilitude, which I would argue is higher than The Dark Knight. Firstly, despite Gotham being clearly not a real place, it is very much believable and follows the laws and behavior of an American city. Furthermore, the politics of the city, detail in the set dressing, Batman's gadgetry, as well as fighting style, gives the Batman more verisimilitude to me. Even for things like the contacts, which I don't necessarily like, are somewhat believable at this point in 2025. There are of course other aspects that lower the verisimilitude, such as Batman's overwhelming strength and ability to take out huge numbers of people. In terms of abstraction, the film has many expressionistic elements, such as the high depth of field, lens imperfections, extreme color grading, and an almost intrusive musical score, which are used to heighten the emotional impact of events to match Batman's own personal experience. We are seeing a more sensational version of the actual events, unlike The Dark Knight. A broken criticism. Now, it's about to get a little bit more complicated here, because it is clear that the two films have a difference within this system, but now I want to go back to my argument in the previous video. I argued that the Batman was too realistic, trying too hard to match reality. This sentiment is the core thesis of this video because it requires a much deeper explanation, and I don't think I actually articulated what I meant, and with this new understanding, my original criticism has kind of fallen apart. And one key way it fell apart is condensing all of this into quote-unquote realism. A criticism I have of the Gotham City and the Batman is that while there are successful attempts to make this fictional city believable, it's not always consistent. There are some shots that still rub me the wrong way. Some on-location shots bring back that Dark Knight feeling. Some shots taken on location do not match other places in the city that clearly had more detail and custom VFX. I want the city to be more fictional yet more believable, so that means less naturalistic with more verisimilitude. The failure of the criticism is lumping my take on the city, which is concerned with naturalism, with other aspects of the film that are not related. But before I try to re-articulate my argument, I want to point out a comment I got on that video. Rather than criticizing what it is, it just seems like you didn't like it because it's not what you wanted personally. Which is fine, I was expecting more of a criticism of what it is, rather than criticizing for what it is not. While I conceded that the video was subjective, I feel like I could have presented the arguments in a more objective sense, or at least providing a convincing reason for why I valued certain characteristics of storytelling in Batman media. Why does Batman need to be realistic or fantastical? What is that actually doing for the character, or is it just a personal preference? Why realistic? First, let's explain the importance of realism for Batman as a character. While The Dark Knight is different within my made-up system, the two films still share a lot of the same priorities, and the creators often cite quote-unquote groundedness as a big concern. I greatly value the Batman for what makes it unique to the Dark Knight trilogy. I think there is a value in originality or a fresh take on something. This is why I praise the characterization of Bruce Wayne, taking him away from the confident billionaire playboy philanthropist towards more of an isolated revolutionary, pinning Bruce Wayne against the wealthy and making the wealthy's relationship with Gotham align more with reality, breaking down the myth of philanthropy and the quote-unquote good billionaire, while also conserving some gray area in the discussion. I find it not only more relatable and relevant to the current state of America, but also fresh outside of the countless stories about rich Batman with a million advanced gadgets that pose no consequence to him. I did like in the Dark Knight trilogy that they at least explained how Batman needed to fake accounting just to secure funding for his illegal actions. I think flipping it on its head, having a Batman that is less of a superhuman who has realistic limitations like money, make for a more interesting and fresh story. This is exactly why I did not like the Joker in the deleted scene, because while his writing was unique and articulate, his design was derivative of the Dark Knight like many other parts of the movie. Looking back at Christopher Nolan's approach, he took Batman and depowered him drastically, especially in The Dark Knight, and made up for it with expensive technology that wasn't always believable, which entrenched him again into that billionaire persona. The Dark Knight specifically made Bruce Wayne a special person for his privilege, a chosen protector of Gotham over the less fortunate, a hero who deserved a statue, a very traditional hero. It is a very much post-9/11 story. It pits normal humanity versus the terrorists. And the morally gray area doesn't come from how the terrorism is festered in society in the first place, but what Batman is willing to sacrifice to stop it, what Harvey Dent is sacrificing to stop it. Despite the lack of physical power Batman has in his punches in The Dark Knight, he still seems to have a tight grip on the city just like the comics. In contrast, the Batman is more complicated. It is a journey for Batman to discover the myths of crime and heroism in his city, discovering that in fact his own personal tragedy can provide an answer, a more human answer. The Dark Knight is how you stop crime, or what you sacrifice to stop crime. The Batman is about why crime exists, taking away the supernatural evil element of it, and explaining why society keeps it in place naturally. The reason I compare the social and thematic aspects of these two films is because the realism of the Batman extends these characteristics. A god over Gotham City who stops the evil threat and evil beyond explanation is not interesting to me as a lone wolf with a limited set of technology and connections trying desperately to make a difference. I prefer a low-tech Batman, someone who has to physically look for every detail, someone who is obsessed with the investigation because it brings out their personality. It puts them at the forefront. We can see many of the quiet moments and see when Batman is a nobody who is not in control. The lack of power forces Batman to make tough decisions, align himself with sometimes problematic people, and train his own physical abilities over his gadgets. How someone responds to impossibilities tells you the most about them. And I wouldn't say that The Dark Knight is completely opposed to this, I just think that the Batman does a better job of it. This characterization in some way requires verisimilitude, the believability of a lower tech, less equipped Batman as opposed to The Dark Knight's military machine that has an infinite supply of just the most crazy technology. Batman doesn't have a tank. He has a modified car that already exists. He doesn't have a cave. He has an abandoned subway station. It also requires failure, believable, honest failure in Batman's ability to make a difference in Gotham. When Batman fails on the rare occasion in The Dark Knight, it's because he's up against a force of evil, just an impossible force of terrorism, pushing his morals to the limit. In the Batman, it's due to a lack of control over the socio-economic system that predates him and can survive his primitive punishment. So I prefer a more grounded character in the Batman because it's a fresh take that brings out new ideas for the mythos, and because I believe a less equipped Batman has more personality and interesting challenges to face. Why Fantastical? Now that I've established the importance of making Batman believable, I want to also argue that making a purely believable, purely naturalistic Batman is not desirable at the same time. Fantasy in my mind is something that pushes against naturalism and may or may not be explainable. Realism is relative. You may want one thing to be very realistic while another is completely fantastical, so you cannot simply put it on a spectrum. The character of Batman, his gadgets, and the socio-economic and political environment are great, but I feel as though the Batman can invite fantasy in specific aspects of the production, such as the aesthetics of the world, its inhabitants, and character actions. I'm talking about set design, and character traits. In the same way that the film correctly abstracted the audience's experience with the use of heavy color grading and lens effects, I want the same for the elements of the world. And yet these fantastical elements don't need to overtake the entire setting, but isolate important elements of the world and of the characters for emotional impact. The same way the singing and dancing of a musical adds punch to the dialogue and character expression. Right now, all of the expression is external. It's how the Batman was shot, as opposed to invading the world itself. What I mean here is exaggeration, inviting weird or otherwise bold fantasy into a grounded world for extra impact, to make the point very clear about what this is about. For some aspects of the Batman, this works. The Batmobile is grounded, yet some aspects of it are exaggerated. The borderline rocket engine is insane, but expresses the vehicle's power. The fins coming to a point are unnecessary, but express its aerodynamic speed and even resembles a bit of a bat's wing. The opening scene establishing the fear of Batman in the criminal underworld is lit specifically to create harsh shadows. The mugger looks into a street that is abruptly transitioning into a pure void of complete black, which would be a rare occurrence in real life. It seems the limit of fantasy in this world is the lighting specifically. Another big element is Batman's fighting ability. It's not superhuman or without effort, but it's definitely not realistic. Yet I think it exaggerates Batman's anger and willpower. It shows that his big tool is his fists and might rather than his resources. Unfortunately, other aspects fail to have this exaggeration. While the penguin having prosthetics makes the character look different to the actor, the final result is a somewhat damaged but fairly normal looking person. If the person looks realistic, then maybe the clothes could be crazy to show Penguin's greed and ego, yet he wears fairly humble suits. It's bland for the sake of realism as opposed to for the sake of characterization. At least in the Penguin show, they gave him a bright purple and gold car like it's Saints Row to have that same effect, to show that he is an egomaniac. Even the Iceberg Lounge has been turned into a concrete, bland warehouse. I'm not expecting a lavish, luxury lounge like in the comics because, unlike the normal location from the comics, this club is messy, crazy, and unsavory, so maybe incorporate aspects of the fishing company it used to be. Maybe there's a giant rubber swordfish hanging from the ceiling, bobbers and nets that never got removed, a big ice block people can drink alcohol from. It's meant to be kind of disgusting. Another example is Catwoman, which has a good bodysuit, but her ears are just a beanie. Like, come on, dude. Like, really? She couldn't make actual cat ears? It's a freaking beanie, bro. Riddler probably has the most interesting aesthetic, even if I think there could have been more to it. His red paint is an iconic motif, even used in the marketing material. A lot of care went into making Riddler's costume and civilian clothes match his personality. Despite the shortcomings of Riddler from a writing standpoint, like how his riddles kinda suck sometimes, the aesthetic, movements, breathing, and overall exaggerated aesthetic of the character helps elevate him. Like, come on, dude, you really think making a perfect question mark in a coffee is believable in this scene? Yet that shot of the coffee mug is one of my favorites in the entire film. You need those weird things sometimes. You need those things that are not always believable. There is something to love about Batman 1989 because so much of the film is abstract and exaggerated, making it unique from 99% of the films today. The world itself is beyond reality, not even remotely believable. The buildings and pipes twist into the air with no care for gravity. The costumes are vibrant and ridiculous. While I believe this style isn't appropriate for the deep narrative of the Batman, I do think it could have taken some inspiration from its exaggerated elements that make it iconic. And this is why I disliked the wingsuit. While I do think Batman's gadgets should be naturalistic or at least believable, the cape is a part of Batman as a character. It's his costume. Same way I really love the collar on his suit because it makes him look like Dracula a little bit. It's an exaggeration that isn't entirely necessary but adds character. The cape is a defining symbol of Batman in all media. It's not just a utility, it's a way of expression. If there's one thing that's a part of Batman that should undercut realism, it would be Batman's cape. But it's not out of the realm of explanation. I mean, the alternative, the wingsuit, wasn't even as believable as they probably thought it was. The way he turned the suit into a wingsuit looked really odd, overcomplicated, and the VFX was definitely rushed in that scene. Even in Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, they attempt to explain the cape. And while I didn't like their explanation, at least they tried. The cape is Batman's exaggerated feature, and if it doesn't make complete sense, I think that's okay. So yeah, while I want this to be a very grounded world, I want the politics, I want the economics, the social aspects to mirror the real world, tell us something about the real world, and I want Batman to be realistic in the sense that it causes him great struggle. It is a relatable struggle to fight crime and defeat crime and understand where crime comes from, and who is profiting off of crime and who controls crime. But that doesn't mean everything, every aspect of the movie has to be realistic. I think there's certain aspects, like the costumes, like many motifs for characters, that need to be exaggerated to get a point across, to add that extra punch to the characters, to make certain aspects memorable. And that's why I will always say that I love when Batman is realistic, but exaggerated. So I believe I provided a much better explanation of my opinion on realism of the Batman, and maybe it's convincing or at least understandable. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. This is a 13-page long script that I wrote for this, and I really honestly think this was a great exercise and honestly makes me better understand what certain styles I should be putting in art. You know, if I want something to be realistic, how do I want it to be realistic? Because realism as a term is just so vague, and I think it's just a way better way of understanding realism when you put it into this perspective. I also thought just the script and the topic was interesting enough that I didn't really need to do like a whole video essay format where I spend tons of time trying to dodge copyright and insert a billion clips. You know, I hope you enjoyed the kind of time lapse that I put here in the background. I think Robert Pattinson's face didn't turn out perfect, but oh well, it's just a quick little painting I thought I'd do for the background because I thought gameplay would be a little bit generic. A lot of people do gameplay, so not every video can be a video essay quality. But I hope you enjoyed this video, and please tell me what you think. I definitely am critical of The Dark Knight, and a lot of that is subjective, so I understand the love for The Dark Knight, and part of that is because it is realistic. I think it's realistic in different ways to the Batman, but in some ways it kind of is doing something similar to what I want, just kind of the priorities aren't there for me. And so it's, tell me why you like The Dark Knight, because I know there's a lot of people that do still love The Dark Knight over this new version. So tell me what you think of this. What aspects of the realism in The Dark Knight makes it special for you personally? Anyways, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.